grade them, but I would much prefer that we put parking meters at every parking stall. I think it's just one more bit of convenience for the driver. Instead of having to get out of their car, go to a box, pay in a box, go back to their car. I just think parking meters at the locations, specifically at the Crescent Heights lot, should we, as we move forward with that, but I understand mine might be the only no vote on this item. And I also wanted to mention that I didn't receive no donations from anyone on tonight's agenda. Thank you very much.
Lauren?
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to also thank all of the neighborhood watch captains and staff and all of the people who contributed for a successful neighborhood national night out. As far as attendance, I attended the West Side City's COG meeting, and it was my first meeting as chair. We discussed adding cannabis to our work plan to keep our neighboring cities abreast of what we're doing, and for them to keep us abreast of what they're doing. And we also learned that the City of Los Angeles will be starting road work on La Cienega, south of Wilshire. But there is already a lot of construction going on there, so you may want to consider that if you drive south on La Cienega. Consent calendar, item 2H, the study and report on Sunset Boulevard. It talks about stakeholder outreach, but I did not see where there's any outreach to neighboring residents, those residents directly above and below the strip. So I would suggest that we include a component that outreaches to interested residents, because if we don't hear from them now, we will hear from them later. Item 2O, authorizing council member travel to visit cannabis manufacturing, testing, and retail locations. I just wondered if the city manager had any dates in mind for that. And hopefully he'll be able to answer in his report. And that's it for me right now.
Great. Councilmember Horvath.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank my colleagues for their support of item 2P, screening of the documentary 13th. I don't know if any of you have seen it yet, but it is a very powerful story, and I want to thank my friend Irina, who's here tonight. I see you here in the front, who invited me to a screening, and I was very moved not only by the film itself, but by the discussion that followed with the director, Ava DuVernay, Dr. Melina Abdullah, who helped bring Black Lives Matter into participation with our Pride celebration this year and our Pride March. And so I'm glad that we're bringing that conversation here to West Hollywood, the film itself as well as a panel discussion. I think it's a very important conversation for us to be having, and I'm glad that there's support to do that here. I want to thank everyone who participated in making the Next Gen event that happened a very successful event. Over 250 people, young people, RSVP'd and participated in the event. The discussion was lively. There was a lot that came out of it, really good energy and excitement about engaging a new generation in being involved with the city. And there will be ongoing events. There was discussion of hosting them quarterly on different topics of interest. So I really want to give a shout out to Francisco and Kate and the innovations team for making this happen, as well as the communications department, who I unfortunately did not see at the event at the right moment, but I thank you for all the ways that you help create a city voice that speaks to young people in the community, and everyone on staff who made the event happen. I also want to thank Mayor Pro Tem Duran for participating in the event as well. I think it was a good event, and more to come. It's very exciting. I participated in the Local Progress Conference that took place in Austin. It's a network of progressive thinking local government leaders, staff, and community organizations to advance progressive policy best practices. So I will be bringing that certainly to the city. I also participated this past Saturday in a field trip with the sanitation district, the Los Angeles County Sanitation District. If you are interested in learning more about their work, I am certainly happy to share it with you. I also want to thank everyone who participated in National Night Out. I was able to get to all 8 events. I arrived a little bit late to Larrabee, but I made it to all of them. And I want to echo the previous comments of thanks to all of the neighborhood captains, our public safety staff, and all the participating businesses. I'm starting to think that this should be a Taste of WeHo event in addition to being National Night Out, because it was absolutely delicious at every single location. So I just want to thank everyone who made it a success. It's an important night in the community. And finally, I would also like to ask that we get an update on what's going on with the project at Sunset La Cienega. I'm concerned that we hear ongoing complaints from folks in the community about the impact of short-term rentals in our community, and we're doing all we can to stop that. And then there's this entity that comes and says they are blatantly violating our city policy, and there's an announcement about it in the LA Times, and I find that I know many folks in the community are frustrated. I'm frustrated. And so if the city manager or city attorney can give a response to what it is we're doing to address that, I think it's very important that people know that we are taking that issue very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of items. Item 2O, I don't know if the city manager is taking volunteers to go to any of the cannabis sites, but I'd actually like to go to the consumption exploration. And the reason is I'm the one sober member. I don't think I'll be triggered. 21 years ago, you would not have wanted me to go to a consumption lounge, but I think I'd like to go and at least do that. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have any interest in that one, but that is the one I would like to try to attend. And speaking of recovery, I talked to Helen Collins earlier today and found out that the West Hollywood Recovery Center, we are getting closer and closer to a ribbon cutting sometime after Labor Day. I know that people that have been accustomed to using the Recovery Center have been temporarily sited on Melrose, maybe a little longer than we all thought. But I know we're all looking forward to going back to the grand opening of the Recovery Center, which last count was serving 8,000 to 9,000 individuals a month, which is extraordinary in a town of this size to have that much use of the Recovery Center. And I know we're all looking forward to the grand opening, so I want to thank Steve Campbell and Helen Collins and all the staff, Oscar, for all the work on getting that building hopefully opened next month. Finally, I just want to mention that Friday, August 18th is Women's Equality Day in the city of West Hollywood. We'll have lots of programming here at Council Chambers that evening celebrating women's equality, and for more information, you can contact City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you. I have just a few brief comments. One, I want to echo the comments of my colleagues about Neighborhood Night Out. We will be recognizing all of the organizations and the leaders of those organizations at a later council meeting. I also wanted to ask the city manager, tonight's agenda, we have the second reading of our earthquake retrofitting ordinance, and some questions have arisen about condos and whether all condos are exempt or only those condos that fit within those two categories of buildings that are in the ordinance. So apparently there are some condo owners who are wanting to make improvements, and they are being put on hold because they're not getting clarity as to whether they're exempt. So that may be something that needs to be clarified and brought back to the council at a later date. And finally, West Hollywood just kicked off our Go Solar program, and this is a program that allows West Hollywood property owners to get technical assistance with respect to the solar potential of their property. And it's really focusing on multifamily dwellings, apartments, and condos, which is the bulk of our housing stock here in the city of West Hollywood. All property owners are encouraged to participate, and but we're really trying to target the more difficult ones to convert, which are the multifamily and condo associations. The program allows people to work with an organization called Solar Advisor and help get options for solar retrofitting of existing buildings. We have additional information available on the city's website. You can just look at gosolarwesthollywood.org and you can find out more information, or you can contact City Hall, and I believe Robin Eason is here in the audience. Robin, are you here? If anyone's interested, she's right here to provide information and connections for you. So thank you for your work on that, Robin, and thank you for those building owners that have already started the process of trying to convert their building to solar power. And that's it. So now we'll turn to the city manager's report and then the consent calendar.
Okay, there's a number of things that I need to report on. I'm going to go from the easiest to the most difficult. So 2M, Councilmember D'Amico, they are pay per space machines. So you only need to go back to your car if you didn't get your space number. But if you get your space number, you walk in and you pay the space. So it's a little bit different. It's not like the kind with a ticket, but it's still I'm just clarifying for the audience. Let's see. One of the questions that was asked prior to the meeting was to provide a brief update on the crosswalk improvements along Santa Monica Boulevard. We will be done with the median work by the end of this week. I believe it's August 11th. At that time, we'll be able to restore both lanes in both directions, so traffic will move slower. There will be some periodic closures, but they will not be during peak hours. We're still anticipating the completion date of that project to be late September, early October, so I would say early October. The item for, is it 2.0, the cannabis site visits. The item was written to provide flexibility for council members who may want to visit locations. The first trip that is planned was the result of the study session that we had here at the council chamber. Council member John D'Amico made contact with one of the speakers. Based on that, we're doing a couple of site visits in Denver, Colorado, where there are both retail manufacturing establishments, but most importantly, what we want to look at and visit there are the testing facilities. Let's see, what else do we have? The 2H, the Sunset Boulevard program, we will definitely make sure that we outreach to the neighbors as well, because as Councilmember Meister pointed out, we do need to hear from the residents as we're visioning such an important boulevard. I'm going to do a tag team on the seismic update and also on the 8500 Sunset Boulevard with the city attorney. First, 8500 Sunset, when it was brought to our attention that the operator of that building was planning to do extended stay, we immediately sent them a letter identifying the code and legal issues associated with the extended stay. The city attorney and I did a conference call with the operator and their legal counsel, once again reiterating that the proposed use was not legal and in compliance with our code. The operator came in to do a meet and greet. They're doing some basic upgrades to all of the units. I believe they're upgrading the electrical because they're going to be installing washers and dryers in all of the units, including the affordable units. So the time to occupy the affordable units has not been set yet. Mike and I do have a follow-up meeting with the entire team of the operator, the owner, and their legal representatives at the end of the month, and at that time we'll push for that schedule, so we'll be able to report back at a later date. Mike, is there anything that you want to add?
Oh, that was very complete.
Was that
Yes.
really complete? I'm sorry. The last item is the seismic. Tonight's item on the seismic is only for those two classes of building. From a policy perspective, and we can get clarification on it and come back to council with a report, was while the discussion was specific to these two classes of construction, is that the theory for exempting the condos would apply to other construction types as well. And that is not on the agenda tonight, but if we do want a clarifying report for council to vote on, we can prepare something and bring something back to council. Mike?
Yes, I think it's easiest to respond, Mayor, to your question by referencing the ordinance itself in consent calendar item 2E. This ordinance establishes mandatory seismic strengthening for two types of construction only. The first is for concrete, non-ductile buildings. And then if you look on attachment A, which is ordinance 171011, section 13.36.020 entitled Scope sets out the exceptions. So these buildings listed in exceptions 1 through 5, which includes residential common interest developments or condominiums, these exceptions are exceptions to the requirement that this specific type of building, non-ductile concrete structures, be strengthened. And so if the condominium building in question is not a non-ductile concrete structure, then this ordinance doesn't apply. Similarly, in the second part of the ordinance that deals with steel moment frame buildings, same thing. Only those condominium buildings that are steel moment frame buildings are expressly exempt. Condominium buildings that are not steel moment frame buildings are not subject to a mandatory seismic strengthening requirement in our code. You have not adopted a mandatory seismic strengthening requirement for any condominiums that aren't exempted by this ordinance. Is that clear?
Does that include buildings that have, there was another type of building that we did approve mandatory retrofitting for, and those were the dingbat buildings.
The soft start
Sorry.
building. And if a condominium building is built in that, it falls in that category, it is not exempt. It would have to comply.
So the problem that arose is a condo association has asked our building and safety department what category of building do they fit in, and they can't get an answer. And they, at least this is what I've been told, is they were told we won't be able to answer that for a year. Meanwhile, they have, other kind of projects that they want to do, and they don't want to invest in that unless they know they're exempt from any retrofitting.
So all they want to know is what category they fall in. Well, I think we can follow up on that.
Okay,
All right.
thank you. And obviously, I haven't checked with building and safety, and I'm hearing this secondhand from them. Paul, does that complete your?
It completes my report, but I guess going back to the question on the seismic, we can research and get the information back to whoever contacted you. It won't take a year. We'll do it sooner than a year. But is this something that the council wants to consider exempting condominiums that are part of that ordinance?
I think it's not on the agenda tonight, so we probably need to agendize it, and we need to have additional information as to how many are we talking about.
Got it. So we'll get more information back to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, I just had a follow-up question for the city manager about the Sunset La Cienega. And I realize this is not on our agenda, and it probably shouldn't be because we have a development agreement that we assume they're going to follow. But I'm just would like to be clear that I'm concerned that we sort of voted to make a neighborhood on the Sunset Strip, and we didn't vote to have a transient population in those apartment buildings. And I'm concerned that our affordable housing units are not being nestled into a neighborhood, they're being nestled into a hotel. And I realize you're not negotiating with them, you're explaining what they have to do. But I also think I remember the deal points of that development agreement, and we were supposed to receive the certificate of occupancy of the housing in order to use the billboards, and then once they received the certificate of occupancy for housing, they could use the hotel, so that we wouldn't be simply making a hotel. And so I'm wondering if you could also investigate whether we can have them take down the billboards until that becomes housing. Because the spirit of that effort was not just to give them a certificate of occupancy and leave the buildings vacant, but to produce and provide housing. So in your discussion and clarification with them about the intent of the development agreement, perhaps we need to look at taking a pause on the billboards on that site until they can clarify their actual planned use. And the last thing I want to say is that I looked at the website of AKA, the corporation, I believe, that purchased that, and I couldn't see that they own any apartment buildings. So that's not in their list of sort of regular business activities. So we may want to assign a management company to assist our affordable housing units. If this is the first time they're going to be managing an apartment building of several hundred units, we may want to make sure that the 19 units of affordable housing get an additional level of care for some amount of time, 6 or 12 months. So thank you.
Great. We're definitely all on the same page.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think,
yeah.
what you're saying tonight, what the council's saying tonight, really reinforces what Mike and I are sharing with them. So thank you.
Okay, that completes council member comments and city manager's report. We'll now turn to the consent calendar. What is the fiscal impact of the consent calendar as it's been amended?
The fiscal impact for tonight's consent calendar with the removal of item 2L is $129,100 in expenditures, $33,557 in potential revenue, and $1,875 in waived fees.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by pushing your button. And there we go. And the motion is approved. The consent calendar is now approved. We'll now turn to unfinished business because we have no public hearings tonight. And that is item 4A. We have 2 subcommittees that we have not yet appointed. If we're prepared to do that, apparently everyone who had an item on the consent calendar is now leaving. All right. We have 2 subcommittees, the Laurel Avenue Subcommittee and the CSW Pride Subcommittee. Why don't we first start with Laurel and see who is interested in doing this, and then we can choose.
Yes, I'm very interested, and I would give up the CSW subcommittee, which I know that Mayor Pro Tem Duran is interested in serving on.
Okay. Who else is interested in serving on the
I'm
Laurel?
interested, Mayor. Since I'm no longer on the West Hollywood Park Subcommittee, I'd like to move to 1343 Laurel.
Okay. Other people interested in that subcommittee? Okay, if we're all comfortable, we can go ahead and appoint Lauren and John Duran to that subcommittee. All right, now let's talk about the CSW. That was the consensus of the council, for the record. And CSW Pride Subcommittee. Who's interested in serving on this?
I'm interested, Mayor.
And I would like to continue. I've been doing it now for 4 years and have some of my own institutional memory. Sometimes I remember things. So without anyone else objecting, I guess it will be John and I.
Well, I'm also
Oh,
interested.
all right.
But let's ask our other colleagues. Are you interested? No? You're okay? You're okay? All right. So if John Duran and John D'Amico, if you're both interested in doing it, I'm okay with that, if everyone is in agreement. All right. So, but I will say that that means, John Duran, you actually have to go to the festival, which you didn't do this year.
I was there in the daytime, I wasn't there at night.
Let's take a vote.
We're, as a council, ordering you to
I
go.
have to be there at night
At
too?
nighttime.
Nighttime also?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So that's consensus of the council as well. And that completes item 4A, and that brings us to 4B. And I believe Joanna Ankemura is going to do the staff report for it. Are you being joined by others?
I'm here alone tonight.
Okay.
We're with you, Joanna. You're never alone.
We've got your back.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Joanna Hankhammer, Principal Planner overseeing the Capital and Special Projects Program. Item 4B is a general update regarding the city's Capital and Special Projects Program, which has expanded since the council last reviewed. Can you put this up here? Thank you. Thank you. Since the council last reviewed the program schedule in 2016. The city's program is diverse, including the building of new facilities such as the Aquatic and Recreation Center under construction at West Hollywood Park, reimagining a new use for the city-owned property at 1343 North Laurel Avenue, and implementing the Design District Streetscape Master Plan, to name just a few of the projects. New projects have been added to the program as well, the most complex of which is Metro, which consists of several projects, technical and design studies, outreach and advocacy, and partnership building, all aimed at realizing rail service to West Hollywood, a long-held aspiration for the city. As part of this item, council also received a memo requesting approval of a full-time staff position. This position is needed to move quickly to implement the Capital and Special Project Program as presented, and to continue to respond to new opportunities in the future. As well, in response to some of the questions about the program, the staff report includes clarifications, such as the prioritization of projects listed in the staff report does not rank projects by importance in relation to one another, but rather it illustrates the sequence in which projects will proceed. That many project schedules will overlap and proceed simultaneously, and that the projects on hold, previous community input and project development are being retained for use and reference when the project resumes. This program is reflected in the current approved city budget. Attachment 1, which is shown here, describes the timeline for the program. Staff seeks council's confirmation that this is the correct and appropriate sequencing of projects. This is a unique and exciting time for the Capital and Special Projects Program. The city is currently under construction with the $95 million West Hollywood Park Phase 2 project, which is being phased in order to allow each recreation facility to be open for use while its replacement is being constructed. And upon its completion, will include an AIDS monument. The city has well-loved parks and facilities on the east side as well, such as Plummer Park, for which the program anticipates continued outreach and feasibility studies, building on the community's past input and new priorities. The city is partnering with a private entity to design and pilot an architectural digital billboard sign that'll serve as an innovative public art venue and catalyst for new energy on the Sunset Strip. And with the announcement of the Olympics returning to Los Angeles in 2028, the city's opportunity to accelerate the construction of the northern extension of the Crenshaw line to West Hollywood becomes even more achievable. Finishing the Crenshaw line through West Hollywood to the Red Line will connect 5 existing rail lines in the region, creating exponentially greater mobility within and throughout Los Angeles, connecting the region to LAX, to Olympic venues, and to hotels and entertainment in West Hollywood. In conclusion, staff requests that City Council approve the Capital and Special Project Program, including the additional full-time staffing to complete the program as presented. I'm available for questions.
Council questions? We do have one speaker, possibly two.
I have one question, Mayor.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, I know when I first read this, a previous version of the report, and I think some of that's included here, they're listed in chronological order from 1 to 10, but it's my understanding that some of these things are actually happening concurrently, and it's not as though, you know, we're not going to be working on Metro until we're done with the park and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about how these things work together and sort of a global vision for how these will advance?
Sure, let me show you a diagram that might help a little bit. If you can put this up here. So this slide represents many, actually all the non-metro projects that are in the program right now, and they show that they're located at different points along the development process. The development process would start with visioning and programming and end in construction. And along the way, there are various activities, including obviously design and steering committee for some of the projects, extensive outreach, city council approvals, et cetera. So currently, right now, many of these projects are active in these phases, and some of them are on hold in the phases that are shown up here. But for example, the first 5 projects that are listed in the prioritization are all currently occurring and proceeding. The next 2, which include Plummer Park and the Design District Streetscape, are about to resume within the month. So those are very shortly behind in the schedule here. After that, we have the next 2, which are the gateway entries and the 1343 Laurel Avenue, and those projects are on hold pending available funding and staffing. And then finally, the Santa Monica and Crescent Heights property, what's the parking lot being constructed temporarily as a parking lot. That use is being implemented now so that we can use that property, but the visioning for the long-term use won't occur until much later.
And my last question is, there has been an effort to address incentives for commercial historic properties. I don't see that indicated here. I assumed that's because it's not viewed as a capital project, but a different kind of project that we're working on. But I just wanted to make sure that's still on our radar, that's still something that's moving forward, and maybe we can, at a future date, get an update on the timeline of how that's going to move forward.
Sure. I mean, any unsolicited proposal that the city receives, we would, as staff, look to determine what department and program it fits best in, but I can certainly talk with
That's something that's
management
been
about that.
ongoing. So if we can just get an update maybe at the next meeting on what stage that's at and when we should expect that to be reactivated, that'd be great.
Okay, we do have 2 public speakers.
We had a wonderful meeting about this, and you answered a lot of questions, but one question that was brought up that I thought would be helpful if the entire council had the opportunity to think about was that as we move forward with Metro, at some point we will be asked to make a capital expenditure on behalf of bringing Metro here, and that could be quite a large amount of money. And what I mentioned when we met was that I'm concerned that that which might be asked for in 2019 or 2020 would sort of obliterate any other capital project we might want to embark on, and that leaves several projects, the Laurel project, the Gateway, future things. And so maybe you could, with David or the city manager, sort of talk about how you see the financing for these projects that are here listed going forward as we reach 2019 and beyond, and and would we be having to sort of not do these things and do that instead?
WD-40. Anyway, the projects that are in the pipeline now are fully funded, and they're fully funded through the general fund, parking fund. We have bond proceeds for from the redevelopment agency for Plummer Park. Also, some of the projects that we're going to develop will be self-funding. I look at the opportunities at the Crescent Heights, Santa Monica project. Well, we haven't fully designed something, a big portion of that, if it is parking, will be fully funded. The metro discussions are really significant discussions that have not fully been vetted and have been fully part of our strategic planning for long-term projects. So it's something that's still fresh and still new. One of the things that we have been painfully good at is capturing new development that has significant economic development and economic return, and not allocating that to anything but big major new things. So looking at the pipeline now with the revenues that are coming in from the hotels that are in construction, they're going to keep this master plan moving forward. On top of that, there are other hotels and other new developments that are being proposed that at some point we would want to come back with a new master plan and look at redirecting and focusing those resources. Also, depending upon the magnitude of the metro improvements, there would be other discussions that would have to take place as well in terms of potential partners and looking at creating other debt and maybe other specific dedicated revenue sources. We're not at that point yet. Really what we're looking at now, and we had talked about this, is for a city of the size of West Hollywood, what is occurring here is truly amazing. The amount of capital investment and investment in community spaces is, you know, from a percentage of budget and the size and scale, I can ask Joanna, I don't think there's anyone that is really on the same scale that we are. And it took 20 years to come up with that plan. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. So the funding was always part of that. As we look at moving towards Metro and looking at some of the initial investments, the seed money that we will have to advance, I'm comfortable we're going to find that. It's really going to be the longer term projections that we're going to have to understand. And, you know, from an economic development perspective, and I see John Leonard hiding in the dark back there, there still is significant capacity in the city. So I think as we move forward, those are going to be bigger discussions that we're going to have, because right now the magnitude is just a real big range, and once we understand the size of the project, then we'll be able to start structuring the program. So I said a lot of things. I don't know, but what's in front of,
I heard what you said.
Yeah, what's in front of us tonight in terms of that plan, that is fully funded. It's well within the means of our budget, and resources over the years have been dedicated to those projects.
And the last question I have is, I don't see the theater on this plan, and is that because it's in some other department and not handled by your activities?
Currently, that project went straight into Public Works to do tenant improvements, and they, just like the Worley Building, there are certain projects that aren't listed on the capital project. We really list the ones that include a lot of interdepartmental and interdivision work and interagency work, which is really what this list is.
We do have two public speakers. The first one is Stephanie Harker, to be followed by Kathy Blavis.
Stephanie Harker, City of West Hollywood. I hope you'll indulge me from my first appearance tonight. I was remiss in thanking the fabulous rent stabilization staff, Peter Noonan, Elizabeth Savage, attorney Allison Regan, Laura Schoonover, Tom Anwar, Chris, and one of the best in city employees you have, Yelena Orloff. So I just wanted to thank them too for all the help they provide the commission now and continuing on. So back to our list here. Um, I just think that I know that this has been on hold, and it's very exciting to me that we have a second chance with Plummer Park, and probably about a third chance with Laurel Park and the Linnick Weissman home there. But there were so many things that Mayor Pro Tem John Duran and I spoke about when we took a walk through there not too many years ago. The renovation of Fiesta Hall into a multi-purpose performance venue. When what's recommended is making it into a performance venue of 150 to 200 people, where it seats 500 now. So I hope we'll be able to look at those things in more detail and really have improvement and expansion of the parkland and green space. We'll have the $9.25 million, which is way down from the original 41. But again, Mayor Pro Tem and I spoke about possible eminent domain for that property around it and really expanding that park. But I think it's really important that we do this sooner than later so that it doesn't come up when we're racing through, and have the public input be significant this time around. And I do feel like it's a second chance with both of those facilities that all of us would love to use. They're wonderful, and we have very little meeting space as it is, so here's hoping. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Blavis.
Hi, good evening. Kathy Blavis, City of West Hollywood. I echo the same sentiments as Stephanie Harker with regard to the capital improvements. Naturally, I'm here to speak about Plummer Park, and I'm just concerned that we, you know, when I read things like looking back at previous public feedback, I hope we're not going to be going back to 20-odd years of public feedback and actually moving forward and getting new public feedback. That really concerns me. And you know, having been a part of WeHo Park Phase 2 and seeing that process and comparing that process to the process for Plummer Park, it's very striking. There was so much more involvement in terms of various and meaningful design ideas. So I'm hoping we can, with whatever money we have to spend on the park, it's not just rehashing, you know, aspects of the old plan. So that's what I hope for. With regard to Laurel Park, I'm concerned that there's no budget, that there's absolutely no budget for this historic building. We talk about community space and having more community space in the city. We need even more, and I love the idea of some sort of a temporary use for that building. So I'm hoping it doesn't just remain in mothball situation, and that, again, we could actually implement some of the ideas that came about from 2014. Having said that, I'm very excited about all the projects and that our city is advancing, and we have the money to do all of this. But again, I'm hoping for really comprehensive outreach to community, especially with regard to Plummer Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, council member comments and discussion. Council member Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. Joanna, I was just wondering, the feasibility study from Metro, do you know when that will be coming out? And when it does come out, can we have an update from staff?
Yes, I'm going to bring an update actually in the October meeting, which will be the meeting right after it comes out to the Metro Board in September.
Okay, great. And then my only comments were that on the Gateway Entries program, I'm wondering if we should be involving our communications division, because it seems to me from what was written that there was a lack of agreement about what this should look like, and maybe this really is a branding issue. And if we brand, if we know what we want at the gateway entries, which need to be our brand, then we'll have a better handle on what should actually happen there. So I would suggest communications be involved.
We'll definitely have a team involvement. We'll be bringing back an item with some concepts and ideas for council, and we'll be able to discuss it more.
Okay, and then just lastly, with all of these projects, I really think that we are making a case for why we need an office of an architect or a design studio, whatever we want to call it. But I think with all of these projects, it's really a necessity. Thank you.
Sorry, scheduling issues. So we have our council member Horvath had comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Joanna for her presentation, for the entire team who worked on this item. I think it's very exciting to see the improvements that are coming to the community in so many ways, and this is the result of many years of hard work, of smart investment, and prioritizing community needs and community benefits from all the work that's done here in the community. So to see all of these projects that have been happening. I know just recently I got an email, which reminds me I need to respond to that email, about how the dealing with traffic improvements on Melrose and in the Design District area. And right here I see that the Design District streetscape is one of these projects that's on our plan. This is something that is in the works to address these issues that we hear about from the community. So it's really exciting to see all of these things happening. Knowing that many of them are happening concurrently means there's a lot of work happening in the city, and that sometimes is difficult, as we see going up and down Santa Monica Boulevard right now. But those changes are for our long-term good and for the benefit of the community, and I want to thank everybody who's making those possible. In particular, I want to call out two items: the Crescent Heights Santa Monica Boulevard property. I've been asked about that since we purchased it. How soon would it become accessible to the public? How soon would we do something with it? And I was always told right away, as soon as possible. And part of that process had to do with the environmental impacts of doing some of the changes there, and there were some studies that had to be done, and all of that delayed what we were able to do publicly. So I know it's been frustrating that that has been delayed, but that's why. It's not because the city hasn't been prioritizing it or moving it forward, and I didn't want this list to communicate that it hasn't been a priority for the city. We've actually been moving to open it up as quickly as we possibly can, given all of the studies and everything that needed to happen. But I know you're asking, and I know it's frustrating, and so I just wanted to share that. Also, I can't stress enough how much work is being done to bring Metro to this city, and Joanna's really a lead on that. This presentation, indicates, in top line form what's happening, but there are so many moving pieces and parts, and staying on top of that is a beast of a project. And so knowing that one project alone, combined with everything else is happening, there's a lot that's happening to move these projects forward. And so I just want to say thank you, and keep us checked into what you need from us on those things, not just us as the council, but the community, because I know that we're constantly receiving inquiries and requests about how people can participate and help support the work that you're doing.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Move the item.
There's moved. Is there a second?
I'll second the item, but I wanted to say one thing, that I think that I'm no longer on the subcommittee for 1345 Laurel, but I think that there's been some discussion about the cost of bringing that building back into service, and I would encourage the subcommittee and our city manager and Joanna to move that along. I think if we look at the schedule that's here, we show that in 2018 there'll be one of these projects finished, and in 2019 there'll be 4, possibly 5 of them finished, and that's very exciting. But whatever dollar amount, whether it's 4 or 5 or $2 million to bring Laurel into service today, 8 years from now it will be incrementally higher, at 6% per year, which is about the cost of escalation of construction. 5 years from now, that's 30% more, perhaps more. And so I think all of these projects are uh, are certainly important, and I think you've very carefully, at least when we met and now this evening, re-explained why they're in the order they're in and why it makes sense to do them. But I would like if the maker of the motion would accept that we move this, but with also the idea that it's very important to have an interim use for Laurel, and that we have that effort move apace with this newly formed subcommittee.
I think Lauren and I heard you.
Good.
We heard you.
I didn't hear you, John.
I think Lauren and I heard your comments.
Okay, great. We have a motion. Were you done? Okay. We have a motion and a second, and I want to echo my colleagues and thank you, Joanna, for your work in keeping all of these and juggling all of them and moving them all forward. And it really is, as Lindsay said, so impressive when you see all of these major projects listed together and prioritized, all that we're doing. So thank you for that. City Manager Arvalo.
Just to make sure too that we did do the supplemental staff report, so as part of the recommendation was changing the temporary position to a full-time budgeted position.
Yes.
So thank you.
That's included in the motion. Okay, any further discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye or pushing your button, sorry. And the motion approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am going to call up 2L first because I think we can handle that quickly. And I know that there was some question about whether everyone was here. Are they all here now?
They're all
Okay.
here, but
I had told 2L we were going to call them up because I think this can be handled pretty quickly. This is the consent calendar item on the HBO, and rather than have a staff report, this was pulled by Lauren. And Lauren, if you could just ask your questions or raise your concerns, we can then maybe get this handled quickly.
Okay. Hello. So in the staff report, it said that HBO wants to be able to take over the five-story parking structure exclusively. And first, I want to know, in the past, have we allowed that?
Good evening. The request has not been made in the past. It relates to the construction. Historically, when San Vicente has closed for the event, Robertson has been open and an access point to the structure for the public. Because of the West Hollywood Park construction impacts, San Vicente is the singular ingress-egress point. So no, it has not been approved in the past, but it has also not been requested in the past.
So in other words, people won't be able to access it because we have San Vicente closed.
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
So what can we do then to make sure that the public has access to, for example, the Pacific Design Center maybe at a better rate, their parking, because they're not going to have parking? I mean, what do we expect our public and our residents to do?
Staff is conferring amongst themselves.
Thank you. The options, the nearby parking lots, the Beverly Hills parking lot, the Melrose parking lot are options to offset the loss of the five-story parking structure. The PDC, I'm not sure about that. I believe HBO does use most, if not all of that for their guest parking. But the Melrose lot and Beverly Hills lot would be options.
I think it is an issue because Sunday is a very busy day on Robertson, and that effectively will close off all of that parking to patrons, businesses on Robertson.
But what are our options on this?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like we have
We
it.
don't have any options.
Isn't there a way to just move where the street is closed past the entrance to the parking lot?
No.
I mean, you can turn left in here and you can turn out, and I mean, it would move it up the streets 150 feet.
There are options if, with an approved plan with public safety. At this time, historically, this same route is arriving from the south up San Vicente to a check-in at HBO for their secure arrivals, accessing next to the PDC drop-off, and then they do a loop at the northernmost section of that closure, flip back around and exit onto Melrose again. So we would have the cross-traffic and the ingress and egress at the 5-story parking structure. It is potentially doable with the extra management potentially of additional support. That cross-traffic as the arrivals both for the early viewing as well as the after party are pretty extensive number of vehicles, and that cross path may be a security issue, risk not only for drop-offs at the event, but in the egress and ingress of the 5-story parking structure.
Yeah, the challenge we're going to have is that the kind of the epicenter of the entrance is right across the street from the entrance to our parking structure. So that's a challenge. I think what we're hearing, though, is we're creating a deficiency, and we can work with staff to come up with alternatives, and we'll post those. I think there may be some opportunities at the PDC. I know that we can also reach out to pavilions for the rooftop. There's other avenues. Also, while Sunday's a busy night, it's really the award night, so it's primarily people coming to the awards. But let us. I think approving tonight's plan is critical because we do want to host the event. I'm recognizing that we need to work on coming up with better accommodations for parking, and we will do that and report back to you.
And I guess my question is, if there are cost implications of us trying to accommodate, can we make sure that that's handled by HBO?
We will work with HBO for additional parking, absolutely. One of the things that I did want to mention, if it's all right with you, is that that zone of the Robertson drop-off area is one of the highest drop-off areas of Uber and Lyft in, I believe, the city. Not just, I mean, in some of the higher airpacked areas. So the number of parking needed compared to the past has been reduced, which is a good thing, but we, of course, will look to all accommodations as necessary.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's a motion to approve with the direction that has been given to look at alternate parking availability for the public. And it's been seconded. All in favor, please indicate by pushing your button. It has been approved. Thank you all. And now we will turn to item 5A, which is an update and presentations regarding local community choice energy programs. Thank you for your patience. I believe you have a little bit more lengthy presentation, but hopefully not too long, because I'm trying to get the council out early tonight. Robin, are you going to give the presentation, or Bianca?
We have 2 program managers here to give the presentations, actually.
Okay.
I have a small intro, but we can hop right in. Okay.
Good.
So again, thank you for your flexibility with the schedule tonight. We come before you with an agenda item regarding 2 local community choice energy programs, one sponsored by LA County, the other sponsored by South Bay. Community choice energy programs are a great way for cities to purchase clean power at a more competitive rate than a standard investor-owned utility such as SoCal Edison. It also helps cities reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The city's been actively monitoring community choice energy since 2015, and we wanted to take the opportunity tonight to have the entire council hear about the local community choice energy programs. So tonight we have 2 speakers, Joe Galliani from South Bay and Gary Giroux from LA County, to quickly present the major program features. We've instructed each representative to keep their overviews to 5 minutes, after which we can proceed with public comment and city council Q&A.
Okay. Are there questions for staff before we hear our presenter? Thank you for this. This will help us improve the quality of the energy we have and hopefully lower costs for our residents. So this is an exciting initiative and opportunity. And you mentioned the first speaker is Joe Galliani.
Correct.
From South Bay. And you made it all the way up here. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council, for having me back. It's very exciting to be here at this time You know, we came here as one of our first cities back in 2015 and asked you to pass a resolution to participate in the feasibility study. We've come a long way. I won't go a long way tonight because I know we want to move ahead quickly, but I want to say that before I start, West Hollywood knows the meaning of community better than almost any city that I work with. And I am very happy that you have a choice tonight between programs, especially ours, that started. I'm a community organizer, and this program started at the very bottom of the grassroots. So I'm happy to be here tonight. Let's go to the first slide, please. I will not go through all these slides, but other than to point out to you that since we delivered our business plan in February, we have been very busy going to our different cities that are part of this initiative. Just like this city, we've been meeting with staff, we've been meeting with electeds, we've been going over all our materials. Next slide, please. And what materials we now have. We delivered our business plan in February. It's been called by people who are not me the best business plan ever written for a CCA. And we've also got two very critical and key documents for you since the business plan. One is our financial models and our financial strategy, and the other is an especially important document. It's an interview with 5 different portfolio managers, and portfolio manager use is one of the real key differences in between our programs and others. We hang our hat on the use of a portfolio manager, and we picked 5 of the most successful in the industry to answer questions about how that might work. Next slide, please. So what we have presented in our financial strategy to your staff and council, and we're hoping that you're vetting it as deeply as possible, is a 5-year forecast of horizon and near-term risk analysis. And we focus on the startup, the launch, and the early operational phases of our CCA. And our primary purpose is, with this document, to explain and quantifiably, and we mean so that you can take it to a bank and have financial analysts run it down for you. We think there's too much regulatory risk at this time to go beyond 5 years. We're in a huge transition period with CCAs, with the coming difference and adjustment of what's known as the exit fees. Let's go to our next slide, please. So we have provided several firsts, and I'm not going to even talk about those. You can look at those in your deck. Let's move ahead, because I know we've got 5 minutes. Oh yes, risk management. Let me tell you that when I started this project 3.5 years ago, there was a lot less risk involved. It was pretty easy. If we were going to launch a CCA in 2015, we'd be in Fat City, and we are no longer in Fat City because the risks have multiplied. Fortunately, we also hang our hat on risk mitigation and management in our document. And there's a couple of different things that we're really, really worried about. Right now, an arcane concept called the PCIA. It's the exit fee that every customer of a CCA pays for leaving the utility. We all know those fees are going up, and they're going up drastically. All 3 utilities have filed for a new plan. We know that plan is coming. And our plan, our business plan for South Bay Clean Power, takes that into effect and builds our reserve funds so that we can withstand that. The other big unknown in this field that's causing a lot of risk is that regulators are considering reopening up direct access, and we can talk about that some other time as we go to our next slide. So we have identified risks starting in 2014. That's how long we've been following this PCIA, about to become PAM, if you will, factor, and it's about these exit fees going up. How do we manage that risk? We rely on a portfolio manager, as I mentioned before. That's what the public power industry does, and that's what we really hang our hat on, is best practices from the public power industry. You'll see that throughout our business plan and throughout our governance model. We are recommending a regional JPA of CCAs, which is based on the way that municipal utilities in California band together to get economies of scale. There's the Northern California Power Authority and the Southern California Public Power Authority. Those are the models for our regional JPA of CCAs, and that will give our CCAs here in Southern California Edison territory the economies of scale and the size and scope to withstand these increasing prices that are coming. Next slide, please. And where do we get our ideas? We didn't pull them out of a hat. We based our best practices on 2 of the newest CCAs and how they launched and how they financed their programs. And we're very happy to say that since we released our plan, we've had proof of concept, because both of those CCAs have now been up and running exactly according to their plan, and they're paying back their investors and building the reserve fund. So we invite you to watch what they're doing and compare it to our plan. Next slide, please. We won't go into these details much at all, except to say that we looked at, with the increased risk coming.
Excuse me,
Wasn't
Mayor.
me.
I can't do this if he's in a hurry. Can you just take your time and explain it? And if you
I'd
need...
be happy to.
Yeah,
You know, I was given
I'm sure
5
you would,
minutes.
but it's like every slide can't be, oh, I'll tell you about that later, because this is your time. So
Sure.
maybe you don't have to take 20 minutes, but you could slow down a little and
You know, I'd be happy to.
explain some of that. Thank you.
And we do have the PowerPoints in our agenda as well, so thank you.
Great. And I'm just being respectful of your time and the request to leave early, so I could talk about this all night. Let me just tell you that what we, in a big picture, see is in Edison, the margins for CCAs are very tight. And how do we know that? We have an example because Lancaster Choice Energy is up and running. And Lancaster Choice Energy is a very good example of what is actually possible with a CCA in the current time we live in here in California. Because what's possible is beating Edison's rates by maybe 1%, but offering a whole lot more than Edison offers. And what's possible is offering more renewable energy for that 1% less, and even more carbon-free energy. And one of the things that we've learned in the 3.5 years that we've been doing this is that 100% renewable is not enough and doesn't solve our problems. We have to get to zero emission and zero carbon. And so we are, as the other CCAs are doing now, focusing on what is the percent of carbon that we're cutting in year one and moving forward. And I'm happy to say that we are talking about assuming 0.5% to 1% rate decrease and a 60% carbon-free supply. Right now, Edison is at 45% carbon-free. We're talking about starting at about 37 to 39% renewable to Edison's 36%. So these are not the grandiose differences in terms of twice as much renewable as Edison has. It's not 4 to 8% lower rates. These are the reasonable rates. If you look at what Lancaster is charging, they're right in there with about 35% renewable and less than 1% less than Edison's rates. You have to look at this program for all the value added. You have to say, if for the same price, we can give more renewable, greater carbon-free, but we can also create jobs and local investment because we're going to build out our distributed energy resources right here in our local communities. Now you've got yet another benefit of this program that goes beyond just saving the money. And what we're talking about doing is building up reserve funds that enable us to fund the enhanced net energy metering programs that most CCAs have. What does that mean? Right now, I've got solar on my roof. I can zero out my bill pretty much as best I can do with Edison, and that's pretty great. But with the CCA, we're going to pay you a retail rate for overproducing because we want to buy our power from the community. And so if you overproduce with your local home solar, you're going to get a check. Last year, Marin Clean Power gave out over $1 million in checks to schools, municipalities, businesses, and residents. So that's what we're trying to do. And you can only do that if you have the financial stability to be able to have the reserve funds and manage your risks. Can we take a look at the next slide, please? So here's our case scenarios that we explored using real-time numbers. And so on the right-hand side, you'll see two scenarios that we're suggesting cities look at. One is what we call the greener power scenario, and it launches and maintains a 60% carbon-free supply through the first 5 years. And you can see that they also increase the amount of renewables over Edison and the carbon-free as well. And again, it's much more incremental growth and savings than we've talked about in the past. We particularly like the decarbonization scenario. It launches at 60% carbon-free with 35% renewable, and then by 2022, which is roughly, if we launch in 2018, 5 years away, we're at 100% carbon-free by 2022 and 50% renewable by 2022. Senator DeLeon's brand new SB 100 moves us to 50% by 2026 and to 60% by 2030 and to 100% by 2045. So we're continuing to stay ahead of the game and lead with our program. Next slide, please. Here we've broken down for you, and I will invite you to take a deep dive on this whenever you have free time or the need for sleep. This will show you all the different things that make up the price for our two different scenarios. And you can see we're really talking about pennies of savings. But multiplied by millions of ratepayers, this is a significant amount across the South Bay initiative. Next slide, please. So phase-in, this is a very important thing. Other programs are talking about doing a very slow phase-in for the first phase and testing the billing period and starting with only municipal buildings in the unincorporated area. We ran the numbers and we don't think that's viable. We think you need to bring in a good 28% of your customers to start with to get those revenues flowing in the first phase of your program. And we've seen that the billing problems in Lancaster and Apple Valley have been solved rather quickly. So we want to start enrolling customers right away, almost a third of them when we launch, and by a year later we'll have everybody in. Next slide, please. These are some of the portfolio managers we talked about. These are the people that are nonprofits that are usually working with the municipal utilities. They're in the public power business, and they are available to our CCA to employ the best practices that the public power industry uses. We intend to, and when you read the interviews with the portfolio managers that talked about our program, you'll see that they discuss the viability of our program, how they would work with us, and whether or not they're willing to work at risk financially, working with no money up front or less and getting paid from revenue through the program. Next slide, please. So I won't go into all of these, but there are some very critical advantages of having a regional JPA of CCAs. So obviously that service can be provided by portfolio managers for the entire regional JPA. We have then an incredible economy of scale, because I hope you understand that when we talk about a regional JPA of CCAs, we're talking about the South Bay Clean Power Group being a member, the Long Beach CCA that's in development right now being a member. We're meeting and actually talking to the Orange County COG and Association of Cities this month because they're interested in exploring the JPA of CCAs with South Bay and Long Beach. We're also talking to Santa Barbara and their Edison territory. So we expect to have multiple members of this JPA of CCAs and be able to take advantage of the economies of scale. That organization, as well as the power authority that this JPA forms, will have an expert staff that will take the responsibility for most of this work away from your staff. Should be some small staff development time leading into this, but the professional staff that the JPA is going to hire to run the public power, there is great talent out available on the street. We're already, even though we're not formed yet, getting inquiries about executive director roles and others. And the most important thing about the regional approach is that each CCA, like South Bay, would be autonomous and sovereign, able to set its own rates, its own portfolio standard, determine its own program elements and design. Look, we've spent 3.5 years working with these 14 cities. Citizens from your city have been part of our working group from day one, and we think that we have something special from a community standpoint because we've agreed on goals and objectives and commitments for this program since 2014. All of our cities want to get to 100% renewable as fast as possible. None of them want to use unbundled Category 3 RECs paper to make that happen. Everyone wants to work with impacted communities and help for environmental justice. Next slide, please, and I'll wrap this up. So what's our timeline? Well, you know, by next month, we'd like you to make a decision and have reviewed all of our financials and other information that we've given you. We hope that you will have it vetted by an independent third party, and then we'd like to get started. We believe that we have delivered a package onto you that is ready to have your city join others and launch this South Bay Clean Power CCA, take advantage of the current low exit fees, and because we have common goals together with our cities, move forward quickly in unison. Next slide, please, if we have any more. We've delivered a great number of supporting documents to you. I apologize to staff. You know, it's a thin line between giving you an amount that we know you can handle in time and actually trying to give every detail that we possibly can to be as transparent and thorough as we can. So your staff has been wonderful. We've met with them more than once. I have to say they've been at least as thorough, if not more thorough, than any staff we've dealt with, and I commend them. So with that, I will wrap up. I appreciate the extended time and the ability to talk more calmly.
Thank you.
Would you like me to allow the next presentation before questions, or? Would you like
Yes, I
questions?
mean, we could haul you away from the podium, but usually
I'd
you
be
would
happy-
just step away and I would call the next speaker, but
Will do so. Thank you, sir.
thank you, Joe. And Robin, who is the speaker from the county?
The next speaker is Gary Giroux. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer for LA County.
Great, Gary, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Hillman and members of the council. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here today, so thank you so much for inviting us out to talk about the program that has been developed jointly with cities. And maybe before I get on the slides, I'll just sort of talk about how we got to where we are today, because I think it is interesting and instructive. 2 years ago, the Board of Supervisors gave direction to staff to go off and do a financial feasibility analysis of whether or not a CCA in Los Angeles County could actually be a going concern, an economically viable program. And that study concluded that yes, in fact, we could, and a year ago that was delivered back to the Board of Supervisors, so last summer. And the recommendation was that the county move forward, that we implement the program, we start delivering electricity in January of 2017. So it would have been now 8 months into the program. And the Board of Supervisors said, we love the idea of rate savings, we love greener energy, we like economic development, we want all of those things, but stop. And they said, we don't want to do this just as the County of Los Angeles. We want to show regional leadership and be part of a community of cities and the county together to build a program together. So go back, staff, work with cities, craft a joint powers agreement working with those cities, and then come back to us and tell us how we can do this jointly together. And that's exactly where we are today. The Board of Supervisors adopted that JPA in April of this year. After we sat down with cities, we had some 50 cities around the table negotiating an agreement over the course of 4 months, really building the governance for a program to say, how do we together as an entity work together so that we can start making decisions? How do we start building policy from governance that you as a member of the council on that board of directors would be able to provide input into what the rules and the programs and the policies and the goals should be. And so that's where we are today. So let's start. The first thing to note is that this is not a new thing in California. There are over 70 cities that are part of this program. And as we sat down to write that joint powers agreement with cities, we utilized the best practices from the existing programs. So all of these programs in Marin and Peninsula and Sonoma all use this JPA sort of format where the county and cities together come together and work out how are we going to govern this entity, and then the governance of that entity goes off and writes the programs and policies. Next slide. So, but why we're doing this, and I think you've heard a bit about this, certainly Mr. Galliani talks about it, but the first and foremost when you're talking about community choice energy is really about choice. It's about giving customers an alternative to what they currently have with Southern California Edison. And you don't replace Edison, you sit side by side with Edison and you create actually competition in the marketplace. And as we all know, competition in the marketplace leads to presumably to better outcomes and lower costs. The other reason is really the idea of local control, that rather than having our rates set by the California Public Utilities Commission in San Francisco, a somewhat arcane and Byzantine bureaucracy in Northern California, now rates, programs will be determined by us here locally, by a member of the Board of Supervisors, a member of a city council, and all of the city councils that join. And so that's local control over our rates, the customer programs, and the power procurement and mix itself. Certainly greenhouse gas reductions, as a chief sustainability officer, it would not be, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the important greenhouse gas reductions. And I think I have a slide that talks about that. The economic development opportunities here are tremendous, and so that's another reason why the Board of Supervisors is so excited to go into this program. And then we actually do believe that lower rates can be had. We are have done numerous financial and technical analyses, the most recent of which was in April of this year, just before the board adopted. And again, just recently, we've refreshed those numbers. We continue to believe that with the economies of scale that come with a program, the unincorporated areas being 1.1 million residents on their own, we immediately will be the largest CCA in California. We will immediately have the largest purchasing power, the ability to drive down costs. Next slide. So the kinds of choices are really up to us in the governance that we create to decide, but we've thrown out or laid out some possible strategies. They're not so different from what you've just heard from Mr. Galliani. These are the kinds of things that all of the CCAs in California are doing, a sort of a base tier, a mid-level tier, and a top-level tier. And even within the top tier, in Marin County, for instance, you can get 100% renewable or you can get 100% local renewable, so you have another option there. Those are the kinds of things that we can design once we start actually building this program. And then there's flexibility. So the way we've designed it through our JPA is that if your city decides that as a default rate you want to offer the 50 or 60% tier as the default rate for every customer, that's the rate that is delivered to your customers. They then have the ability to opt up or down. So that there is that sort of tailoring it to the local community. Next slide. I mentioned the greenhouse gas emissions. What we're really talking about here is probably the single most effective measure that I've seen in a climate action plan, and I've seen a lot of climate action plans. By simply taking this action, laying out 50% renewable energy for your community, you get almost a 10% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions community-wide. That's a tremendous amount in one single measure. And so that's why cities throughout California and elsewhere are looking at these kinds of programs to try to help address their greenhouse gas inventories and reduce their impacts, rather. And then I mentioned the economic development impact, but I want to maybe spend a second on that, and there's sort of comes at two tiers. The first is that just by virtue of the energy savings, when you are returning money into residents and into business owners' pockets, that's money that goes back into the economy. And in our economic analysis, we're looking at an aggregate of about $20 million across the county that will now be available for other economic activity. That leads to real jobs, that leads to real benefits, and we have a macroeconomic analysis that demonstrates that. But more than that, it is really the real opportunity for us to go out and actually build new solar capacity or new renewable capacity locally. And that will bring real jobs to the region. We've estimated that one 50 megawatt solar plant, which is a fairly large solar plant, by the way, would bring 1,500 jobs during construction, another 15 full-time jobs. And we're looking at a peak capacity for our program of about 2,000 megawatts. So you can imagine that's 40 of those plants potentially that would be built locally. I don't think we're going to get 100% supply from just one kind of technology, so that's a what if, but that gives you a sense of the scale. So Mr. Galliani mentions risks, and certainly there are risks in any sort of endeavor, and we need to be cognizant of what those are. And certainly the energy market itself can change. Today, renewable prices are about as low as they've ever been. We anticipate they'll continue to go lower. Natural gas prices are actually about as low as they've ever been. We don't necessarily anticipate that that's going to be the case, that there will be price spikes in the natural gas market given this administration's desire to actually start exporting natural gas, something that we haven't done in this country. There's the opt-out rate, of course, and you need to be concerned about how many customers actually leave the program once they're opted in. Under this program, all customers are automatically opted in. That's the way the state of California law is written. And what we've seen are opt-out rates between 3% and 7% in the other community choice energy programs. We actually modeled a 20% opt-out rate just to see if our program could actually be economically viable with a large opt-out, and it could. It's not going to provide the same rate savings, but we need to be cognizant of that. The charges, or so-called exit fees that Edison charges, is an area where there is a lot of uncertainty. We've been fighting aggressively at the PUC. We recently were successful in a filing or in a rate case around the PAM that had a procedural maneuver that the IOUs had tried to implement, thrown out, and we're gone back to starting that process over. But there are ways to manage risk, and we think that we have identified those in a very serious fashion. So I won't spend a lot of time, but we have, in our JPA, we identified jointly what our goals were. We laid those out in the recital section. So we have not, again, designed policy here, but we've said what are our joint goals. So, of course, renewable energy and distributed energy resources and energy efficiency and the idea of local community solar. All of those things sort of built in are part of the goal, the aspirations for the program. Next slide. So I think it's important to talk for a second about the governance, because as we sat down, the Board of Supervisors, when they gave me the direction to go negotiate with cities, said, make sure that cities' participation is fair and equitable. We want to be equal partners in this program. This is not the old county, and if you are an observer of politics, of course, all elected officials are, you know that the Board of Supervisors has changed pretty significantly in the last 4 years. 4 of the 5 boards of supervisors, or 4 of the supervisors are new. And so really bringing a new kind of leadership to that body. And so we negotiated a 1-member, 1-vote structure. That is, the County of Los Angeles has 1 vote. Any city that joins us that has 1 vote. We had our first board meeting last week, Rolling Hills Estates and South Pasadena and the County of Los Angeles each having 1 vote. We're starting this ball rolling. This is a real program where we are actually going to be delivering power in January. We did build in, and this was based on the best practices from Sonoma and Marin and elsewhere, an idea for a weighted vote, but that's restricted, and it's restricted in 2 significant ways. 1, it requires 3 members to agree, and more importantly, it can only be used after an affirmative vote of the membership. So it can only be used to veto an item. It could never be used to actually move an item through the membership. The membership have to affirmatively vote for everything first. So I've talked about the flexibility. I'll move on from there. So just a little bit about the schedule. When the Board of Supervisors adopted this program, they put up $10 million in county funding and said, we want to front fund the program because we don't want to be going out collecting $10,000 from the city and $50,000 from the city based on their size. That's just too complicated. We'll put the money up front. But they said, we'll only do that for the cities that join over the initial period. We can't continue to provide that funding. So there is what we're calling an open enrollment period for cities. That runs through about the end of the year, December 27th. And any city that joins in this initial period is covered by the funding that we've provided. We also, as I mentioned, are starting now to actually sit down as a board and start to think about the program. The board met, as I said, last week, moved some very bare bones minimum items on the agenda in order to keep us on schedule. But we are going to have to start looking at more significant policy issues. We're going to be looking for a permanent executive director, for instance. We're going to be looking at how do we structure a community advisory committee over the course of the next few meetings. So this is a good time. It's an important time to get in early if you want to actually be part of the decision-making process. And then let me talk about the phasing. Mr. Galliani mentioned that he didn't think it was viable that we should start with just the county's municipal accounts. We have extensively modeled that with the loan that we've provided. We can cover the cash flow to do that. And we're really only looking to do that maybe for a month or 2 months or 3 months until we're convinced that the transition of the billing system is actually working properly. We saw in Antelope Valley, Lancaster Clean Energy, and in Apple Valley, bad bills going out. There were people outside of those jurisdictions getting bills. There were people inside of those jurisdictions not getting the bills. And so there is a little glitch in the system, and we want to be the guinea pig for that. We've got 2,000 buildings in the unincorporated areas. 2,000 buildings is a way to test the billing system, make sure that we're working out the kinks before we start rolling out to customers. But we will roll out to commercial industrial customers, municipal accounts in the second quarter of 2018, and then start adding in all the residential customers thereafter. But this is a real program. It's moving. This train is, I would say, leaving the station, and it's a good time to get on board because this is happening. So we do have a lot of support in the community. Just a number of organizations we'll mention. And then the next slide is just my contact information. So I'm, again, very pleased to have been able to present to you today. I'm always happy to answer any questions you may have and look forward to the conversation.
Gary and Joe, thank you very much for your presentations tonight. We'll now turn to the public speakers, and then we'll have some council discussion. I have a couple of speakers listed, Katie Young from the Office of Supervisor Kuehl, and then Joe Sullivan.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. My name is Katie Young. I'm Supervisor Kuehl's Environment and Arts Deputy, and I'm here tonight on her behalf to encourage you to join us. We're really excited. The supervisor's really excited. And as one of the cities in the 3rd district, she's hopeful and optimistic that the environmental leadership that you exhibit here can be brought to bear regionally. So and that's what I really want to talk to you about tonight is the opportunity that this program affords for regional leadership, environmental leadership, jobs leadership. In this case, we know that size matters. As Gary mentioned, we're going to be big in terms of load, lots of people, lots of potential cities. That can be daunting, but it's also a pretty cool opportunity. When we know that when it comes to the climate change, we have to think big to make a real difference. For Supervisor Kuehl, mitigating climate change, creating local green jobs, that's why we're here. So LACE offers a platform and framework to achieve significant regional air quality and climate benefits and create local green jobs for all LA County residents, not just those from more affluent communities, but from communities all across the region. And they're starting to join, and that's pretty exciting. Supervisor Kuehl is LA County's representative on the board. Like Gary said, one entity, one vote. So she's representing the county and is looking to push a pretty environmentally progressive agenda. And she wants West Hollywood to join her. Together we can show other cities the path forward toward a greener energy future. And we in fact, the way we set up the governance structure, we want and need environmental leaders to join us so that we can, from the beginning, set this off on the right foot. In the next couple of months, we're going to be making some key decisions about what power mix we offer, what programs we offer. Oh, yikes. Let's see. The timing is important. We hope you'll join us. Our next meeting is next month. If you adopt it this evening, you can join us. We would love to see you there at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Sullivan, to be followed by Fran Pavley. Hi, Fran.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. Thank you for having me here. My name is Joseph Sullivan. I work for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 11, as well as the National Electrical Contractors Association. So this represents about 350 local electrical contractors based within LA County that employ about 10,000 electricians. And we've been participating in the various CCA processes for a couple years, and as well as IBEW and NECA up and down the state are participating in CCA processes. And we've come to the conclusion when CCAs are done correctly, they could be very good job creators. And when I say correctly, there has to be commitment to building out local energy programs, reinvesting funds back into the program, having the right back office partners, writing and crafting the correct RFQs for ordering energy, risk management strategies. There's a whole lot that goes into being an effective job creating CCA. It's not one size fits all. There's a lot of CCAs up and down the state that labor's not real pleased with. We've seen that because of the federal tax credit, the renewable portfolio standard, there's been hundreds of jobs created for electricians to do solar work. And we've brought in hundreds of apprentices, mostly from the Antelope Valley, We're hiring people who are like part-time at Home Depot and have kids, and now they have a full-time job with benefits. They're going to be able to work anywhere in the U.S. or Canada for the rest of their lives. The training's 5 years. They don't pay for anything. It's a remarkable training at a net zero facility where they learn all about energy. And so we know these can be remarkable programs if communities create the infrastructure to demand apprenticeship. And so we've read the South Bay Clean Power Business Plan. We like it a lot. We think it does a lot of these things, but we hope you consider CCAs in general and doing it the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. And Fran Pavley, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Pleasure for me to be before this council. A lot of you look very familiar. Sorry, my Senate career was cut a little short here in West Hollywood, and I ended up in interesting places in Ventura County. So I have a good knowledge of a lot of people now who live in LA and Ventura County. But anyway, thank you very much for allowing me to speak for a few minutes. I'm here as a former local government official and a 14-year member of the legislature, and pride myself on my record on clean energy and climate change and water supply and those kinds of issues. In fact, it was Sheila Kuehl who told me when I arrived to the legislature, pick 3 or 4 issues that you're passionate about, focus on them, make a difference. I thought that was very good advice, and I followed it. I'm here in support of the county's proposal for community choice aggregation. As the former president of the LA County Division of League of California Cities, I know it's a challenge with 88 cities to have this discussion, but it's going on in city halls all over the county, and that's exciting because people are talking about renewable energy. Myself, I'm a firm advocate of 100% renewable energy. This is a good way to get there because it's a smart proposal. I was in the legislature when the original renewable energy bill passed and when community choice aggregation was discussed, and have followed the successful pathways that some of our Northern California cities have set forth. Some of them have been operating for up to 7 years successfully. Cities don't pull out of these proposals. If anything, they add on. And the last group of cities to add on down in the Santa Clara area or Silicon Valley area, something like a 90-something% participation rate because they work. So we're not coming up with a model. The county's model and their fiscal plan is based on success that's been demonstrated and modeled in Northern California, but it's spreading all over Southern California. So for that and the governance structure and of course the bottom line of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting off natural gas and ramping up renewables, I very much appreciate your consideration of joining the county's effort. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all of your service. For those of you who don't know, many years in the California Assembly and California Senate. Thank you for all of that service to our state. So that completes our public speakers, and now it's up to the council, and maybe we should just clarify from staff what you're looking for from us tonight. You've been doing a lot of research. We heard from 2 providers here, and do you want us to try to give you direction as to which one to proceed with, or whether we want to proceed at all with this?
Yes, it's really all of the above. At the end of the staff report, we have several different options in terms of the way to go with this decision. There's not necessarily an urgency to decide anything today. We definitely have time to come back and discuss and see how the programs mature over time, but it's really to kind of get a sense from council, based on the presentations tonight, how they're feeling about either one of the programs and what they would like staff to do.
Well, I think we're all excited about the possibility of greater renewable energy sources, and I think we're also excited about the possibility of lower rates. So I can't imagine any of us being opposed to that. Let me turn to my colleagues and see if they are ready to give some direction. Oh, we have them on there already. Councilmember Horvath and Councilmember Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions and also thoughts along the way, so I'll just kind of ask them as I go. I'm very much in support of moving in the direction of being part of a CCA, whether it's the county or South Bay. I think we kind of have to determine what is going to be of the most benefit to us, given and establishing goals that help us understand and evaluate what those benefits are and what we want them to be. For me, the obvious first step is environmental justice and stewardship in our community, but also local control and having a voice in where and how the energy that our community consumes is created. I think having a voice in that is essential, and right now we don't have that, and either model would provide us the opportunity to have a say. And given our focus on net zero community and sustainability in general, I think that this is a really important step in that direction. I think it's also important to consider, while traditionally a lot of jobs in this area are not necessarily created within our 1.9 square miles, the economic benefit that happens beyond our borders does benefit our community. And so for that reason, economic justice is a part of this conversation, and I'm glad we're thinking about that too. For me, I think the infrastructure that the county provides is very attractive to the city. I think there's a lot of upfront cost that the county is willing to bring to bear, and to help help cities move forward. However, I am concerned about the number of cities that will be around the table, and specifically which cities will sign up and what their goals will be in comparison to ours. Some cities in the county are very much like-minded in terms of what I anticipate our goals would be. There are other cities who will strictly be interested in cost savings and things that might not match up with our goals. And if we end up not having, I'm concerned about the weighted vote approach, and if we end up not having enough of our like-minded cities on board, I'm concerned about what that model could look like. So I'm wondering if maybe there might be mini JPAs within the county model. If we did move in that direction, something like the COG could function as a JPA. I think the cities in our COG, we have somewhat of a sense of how we work with them on a regular basis on a range of issues. I am very interested. I think for that reason, the South Bay approach is very attractive to me, because I think it keeps the local control local, and it keeps it a smaller conversation with cities who are definitely more like-minded. However, no cities have yet joined on there, as I understand it, quite yet officially. There are many cities like ours that are having the same kind of conversations, and no one has sort of stepped up yet. So I think, there's a bit of an unknown, and the most unknown that is the greatest risk for us is we need to have some cost hypotheticals for us to really understand what the cost of joining the South Bay CCA would be. I think that's a big unknown, and I don't know that our city is willing to take on the risk of 10 or 15 cities, or and hope that maybe because we jumped first, everybody's going to jump on after. So I think we have to make sure in both directions we would figure out what the best financial approach would be. I have a question about the approach for distributed energy resources. I think both talk a lot about the scale of large projects and creating large infrastructure, but not a whole lot about the smaller add-ons of solar panels on individual housing units or projects in the city. So I'm just wondering if you have a sense of how each CCA is addressing how smaller projects would generate energy, not just sort of larger infrastructure projects.
Can we ask the program managers to come up and answer that question?
And then the other question, if you could answer it since you're both coming up, I assume that, I think from the report what I read was that individual ratepayers have the option to opt in and opt out. It's not the entire city of West Hollywood mandates that every resident participates. So if you could, and the last question then, since you're coming up, is how you're dealing with the energy sources that from which you'll be deriving the energy that would then be coming to our communities. I know that there are lots of fossil fuel players that are trying to get at the table, and if we're sort of trying to move away from that, how do each of your approaches address that? And I'm happy to refresh your memory on the three questions.
Yes, what was the first
So
of the three?
The first one is distributed energy resources.
And what do you want to know about?
Large scale, I'm clear on the
Okay.
large scale projects. I'm
Yes.
not clear on the smaller scale projects.
So I believe I spoke about my own solar and net enhanced energy metering. That is certainly one of the most valuable program elements that Marin and Sonoma, our program has intended on that. We also talk quite a bit about using the UCLA laser study, which I have to commend the county for helping to produce. But that study gives us almost a granular block by block potential for parking lot and rooftop solar. And it's always been, we've mentioned in every presentation we've ever made, our intent to maximize the local solar on every rooftop and parking lot before we buy power from the desert. It's very easy to buy cheap power from the desert right now. Solar is at all-time lows. One of the ways that you ensure that you have this distributed energy and the resources behind the meter, as we call them with this DER, is to make sure that it's called for in your request for proposals, and we've baked that in. And we've watched other requests for proposals not have those elements in it and then not deliver on the distributed energy resources. Your other question was?
Second question was individual ratepayers get to opt in and opt out.
Yes, and it's important to mention every time we talk about community choice that if your city participates in the county program or our program or any other program and you pass the resolution to participate, all of your ratepayers are automatically opted into the program. They're given several chances, I believe legally at least 4 chances before the program ever starts to opt out. They're sent notices. And then it's comforting to know that at any point while the program is running, you can pick up the phone or go online and press a button and say, I'm opting out, I'm going back to Edison, and it's often called the biggest change you'll never notice. So from that standpoint, yes, it's very much each individual ratepayer can choose to accept whatever the baseline is, or if your program has options, they can opt up. Most have options for 100% renewable.
And finally, how are you dealing with the energy sources that are, who's at the table in your conversations, and where are you getting it from?
That's why we're using a power portfolio manager, because we're able to say to them, if our mix is we want this amount of power, let's say it's 50% renewable just for the sake of argument, then you basically place your order with them for that. And if our emphasis as a group, and we agree that our commitment is local first and out of state second, then that's the direction that they will follow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Oh, I was just going to say, can I ask Joe a question before he leaves? Sure. A quick question.
Up here, but let's ask Gary to respond to those 3 questions.
Sure. So we also had built a lot of distributed energy resources into our program. We anticipated that was going to be a desire and a goal as we sat down with cities. Everyone said they wanted to do that. And I think one of the interesting things is the idea of community solar, where you have multifamily buildings and perhaps the rooftop isn't enough to support all of the load of that building. Under a community solar model, you can do it elsewhere and virtually net meter it back to that facility. That's something that a lot of cities are excited about. A lot of cities have a lot of multifamily and they want to be able to support that. So I think we're aligned around the idea of having a lot of local solar. We want the local jobs to go with that as well. I think the answer on the opt-in is the same. That is the same. And then the third point was on...
Energy sources?
Energy sources, right. So one of the things our board did do last week is that it approved the release of an RFP for essentially what Mr. Galliani is talking about, a portfolio energy manager, someone who is not actually in the business of providing energy, but somebody that goes out and manages the portfolio for you. There's actually 2 RFPs. One is also what was called a scheduling coordinator, somebody who helps actually manage the portfolio, but also matches it to the loads and delivers, works with the California Independent System Operator to make sure that we're meeting resource adequacy requirements.
And can you address also my question about how cities are going to have a vote and determining the priorities at the county level, and whether you might think of smaller CCAs as part of a larger JPA or
Yeah, of
vice
course,
versa.
this sort of JPA of JPI of idea has come up, and our view of it has been that it doesn't sound cost efficient or effective to us if there's administrative staff at the sub-regional scale and then administrative staff at a regional scale. That's 2 layers of administrative costs, and we're really trying to reduce costs and burdens to our ratepayers. So we believe that having a single large structure like they do in Marin or like they do in Sonoma actually makes more sense.
And you're confident that there's not going to be a conflict with
I'll say
priorities?
this, in all of the years that Marin's been running, Sonoma's been running, using this weighted vote structure where the county is a large entity, we recognize that, and it's true there as well. They've never actually had to call for a weighted vote. Every vote has always come to a consensus around the issues, and things tend to get worked out in committee. I will say that's why we built in the kinds of flexibility that we did. As I mentioned in my presentation, if your city doesn't want to offer the base rate, you don't have to offer the base rate. You can say for our city, it's either 50% or 100% are the only 2 tiers that are allowed. And if you want 100% on day one, if you want 100% in January of 2018, you can have 100% in January of 2018. In fact, there's an example of that. The city of Portola Valley in Northern California opted for that exact thing for its community, 100% renewable on day one.
Thank you.
I have a question for Joe. One of the points that staff made was that a lead city is required to take on decisions, risks, liability, and costs associated with the CCE establishment period, which could delay the startup of the program. Do you have that city?
No, but I would dispute that staff contention, much as I like staff. We're not asking for any money from any city. We're asking for a lead city to take first steps, but we're not asking any city to put up a dime. We may, depending on circumstances, need a loan guarantee from a financial institution, which we would only ask you to do after you vetted the financials.
Okay.
So, but I want to make that clear. We are not asking any city to put up any money.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
And I want to say, too, that the comparison between Marin in terms of size and Los Angeles County is not one that I would make, because Marin and its power load is tiny compared to even South Bay Clean Power. South Bay Clean Power's 14 cities have more power than the county's unincorporated areas combined.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then my questions for staff. Where do you think we would have the most flexibility? Or is there no difference in terms of flexibility?
I think that would really depend on how many cities end up joining LA County. The South Bay Clean Power model is limited to the 14 cities of the South Bay and West Side cities. So just by default of the limit being 14 cities that would join, there would be more flexibility just to negotiate different aspects of the program at any given time. LA County has the potential to be very large, and so that could make decision-making unwieldy depending on how the board of directors proceed.
And where do you think we would have the least liability?
As of right now, LA County's program would probably be the least liability. The county's put up a huge amount of money to get the program started and done a lot of the lion's share of staffing to get the JPA up and going and to hire an interim executive director. So I would say that LA County would be less liability.
Okay, great. And then, well, I would just say that I definitely want to move forward with something with the Community Choice Energy Program. I think that the goals of local control and obviously the clean renewable energy and greenhouse, lowering the greenhouse gases are very, very important. But I also have to say that I think lowering the costs of energy should also be a priority. We have a lot of seniors here, and we have people with lower incomes that would, I think, really appreciate the cost of their electricity coming down, by 5% or even possibly 10%. So I'm not just looking at the environmental side of it. I'm also looking at the cost part of it as well. I would rather, us make decisions rather than later. I don't know that we have to necessarily make it tonight, but I think that, depending on, where my colleagues are and the questions that they have, maybe they'll want you to come back in next month. But I do think that, within the next month or so, I think we should make a decision, a commitment for one of these.
I have a sort of a question, and maybe this is off base a little bit, but it seems like we're comparing two entities tonight, and there's almost this, to some degree, false equivalency, because one entity has actually started. It is legally formed, and it has member cities that are part of it already. And then the South Bay, Mr. Galliani actually said tonight that it isn't yet formally formed. And that means that no city has actually signed up to be a member of this entity that hasn't yet been formed. So I kind of feel like right now we're presented with not really a choice. If we're going to go this route, the only route that is available to us right now is the counties. And, as somebody who is skeptical of the county, because that's why we became a city, we used to be part of the county, I also feel that they're probably the way to go for us, that they have committed a certain amount of resources, they have the expertise that has been developed. I hear the concern about our voice being lost, but the way they've set it up with each member city getting one vote, we would have just as much likelihood of forming coalitions with other like-minded cities within that structure as we would with the South Bay and the West Side. And I don't think the South Bay cities are always in alignment with the values of West Hollywood. Sometimes they are and sometimes not. Even our own West Side cities were not always in agreement on everything. So I agree with my colleague that I want us to do this. I think it gives us the opportunity to lower costs, but it also gives us the opportunity to get better sources of energy and reduce greenhouse gases and really be much more environmentally sound. So I'm prepared at this time for us to move forward with sort of enabling ordinances and suggesting that we go with the county, but it sounds like my colleagues may not be quite ready to move in that direction. You're ready. Okay. Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have some slightly wonky questions. When there's a brownout, for example, are CCAs targeted first and SCE customers targeted last for reduction in power? Do we know for sure that that won't happen?
I'm going to have the program managers respond.
Okay.
The grid, since the deregulation last time, actually is now managed by the California Independent System Operator. So they determine where, if there needs to be rolling brownouts or blackouts, may occur. All resources, all what are known as load-serving entities, which are basically utilities, provide their power through the California Independent System Operator. The California Independent System Operator then actually manages the grid on behalf of the entire state of California. So there's no discrimination among customer classes or geographic locations other than the extent to which there may be some grid issues.
And we don't expect a sort of net neutrality bill which will, sort of override that the way we fear that might happen federally, which is, these people are more equal than these other people. I mean, we don't see that coming.
We haven't heard anything like that. What we have heard the state of California say, in fact, is that 85% of the California population that's eligible for community choice energy will be in a community choice energy program. So very soon, If you're in Edison territory or PG&E, you're in the minority.
The minority will be the majority, and yeah, got it. Okay, so the curve of renewables starting at 50 or 100%, whichever program one would opt in, when do those curves rise? Because at some point the state legislature, 2045, though that's a ways off, everything will be 100. But is there a sequential rise over time that's already clocked to a date certain?
Not to, at least in our program, there isn't a date certain. That's something, as I indicated, we're creating the governance, and the governance will decide what the schedule is. But we will have to at least comply with state law, and SB 100 actually is accelerating the dates for 50% and 100% at this point. We anticipate we would be well ahead of where the state law currently is, and even well ahead of where the state law is proposed to go.
So, just want to repeat back. So, on day one, we would be ahead of that, but there's no decision yet, though a decision is likely to continue to stay ahead of that and beat those milestones as a CCNA.
That's absolutely our goal.
So I guess this is the same question asked of the two parts of this question, but do you know why the South Bay area CCNE is just not joining with you? Or maybe do you want to say why you're not joining with them? Or, I mean, they're invited, right?
They are invited, and we've offered an olive branch. We have talked to all 14 of those cities and having those same conversations. We actually, Mr. Galliani, are, I think, philosophically aligned. We came from the same place of wanting to promote environmental stewardship and fight climate change. So I think it really is a question around the governance.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing the same elephant. You know, I mean, you're walking around it saying it's gray and leathery and whatever. Okay, the fourth question I have is, so I know that SCE has various sets of programs for disabled people, seniors, and do those programs disappear with this CCNA, or are they grandfathered in? How does that sort of work?
The care rates retain their care rates, so all of those stay in place. We're essentially will duplicate the rate structure, at least at the outset of Edison, so there are other special rates that are provided. Those will be the same kinds of rates we will provide. And then as over time, as we get experience, we may offer additional incentives for those kinds of customer classes, or we may want to offer different kinds of programs as we learn. But all of that continues. There's no disruption in any of those services when the program launches.
And then finally, I know there are I think I know this. I know there are rates based on time of day. So from midnight to 6 a.m., the rates are lower. And you would have a similar tiered rate system, or is it just one rate 24 hours a day, but it's lower overall?
We anticipate, again, probably just taking the existing rate structure that Edison has and applying it, because that's the easiest thing as we're frankly creating a new utility. You got to walk before you can run. But then we can actually look at, is that the right incentive? Are providing higher rates at peak hours what we need to do in light of the changing market? Because in the changing marketplace, we actually have an overcapacity of solar in the daytime. So rates presumably should be cheaper in the peak, but right now they're higher. So we'll have to look at all of those things to see what actually makes sense economically.
So I realize I asked you all these questions, but I have one more question, which is that, so I'm old enough to remember a time when there was Bell Telephone, right? And now there's...
Me too.
There's all kinds of telephone companies, and no one's really happy with any of them, right? I mean, we've sort of disassembled everything to reassemble it to a level of we pay our bills and grouse about when we drop calls, whatever. So my sort of concern is that I don't want to disassemble a system that fairly consistently delivers a service that's worth the dollars that I pay for it. And is there sort of a sense that we're, you know, our optimism is not necessarily checked with our with the wonkiness of just being able to turn on the light and or run the power?
I think the key distinction, Councilman, is that in the telephone sector, we really saw what was basically a consolidation of large corporate interests around that service. Here, what we're disaggregating, so we're not just breaking up the large utility, we're breaking it up, and under California law, the only provider that's allowed as an alternative is one that's run by a local government. I don't see local governments becoming large corporate conglomerates and going out and eating up the world. I think we're going to be focused on our own communities.
And finally, so this CCNA can't do anything but deliver energy. It's not going to get into the cable TV market, and it's not going to start delivering telecommunication services or insurance or, right? I mean, that's it.
Well, we're going to deliver energy efficiency services, electric vehicle services, but all energy services, yes.
Okay. And thank you to my colleagues for all those questions. And Joe, maybe you have some different answers.
Answer your question about the South Bay, and it's important to understand that there was no county CCA program when we started. We brought CCA to the county. We asked them to fund a feasibility study for our cities, and then we worked with their staff to put this program together. And in fact, when Mr. Giroux told you about the county pushing the reset button and saying, hey, we've got to include the cities, that was at our specific request, and we worked with staff on the motion that made that happen. And so one of the reasons that the South Bay is not particularly interested in joining the county's program yet is the deadline isn't until the end of the year. And almost all of our cities are doing what we hope your city is doing, and that's really thoroughly reviewing both the county's numbers and our numbers. We don't want you to take our word for anything, and we ask that you not take the county's word, that you do your due diligence and fiduciary obligations and make sure that the numbers that we're presenting to you are correct and verifiable. I know that I was on Friday at the county's first board meeting, and it was exciting to see them kick off this program with their two cities and the county. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention to you, as I mentioned to staff in my email this morning, that the county acknowledged a $500 million mistake in their numbers on Friday and apologized for that. And they did not catch this mistake. Our good friends and colleagues at the Sierra Club caught this mistake and brought it to the county's attention. I'm sure Mr. Giroux would be happy to verify this for you, and I'm sure he will be happy to tell you that it was just a clerical error, and it didn't change any other numbers whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say everything has been said, but not by everyone. John Duran, Mayor Pro Tem, you have some questions.
I don't have questions. I just have comments. I think in terms of this evening, I'm not prepared to support either proposal. I think I'd like a little more information before we make a decision, but I do want to just put out there some thoughts for us all to think about. One of the benefits of being a border city, and West Hollywood is a border city, is we could either lean towards the county or we could lean towards the west. And I mean, our name says it all, West and Hollywood, which is the center city. So we've often had this position in the geographic and politics of being one of the border cities. I think our city is a little unique and different from others because we have a very obvious nighttime economy that's very different from other communities around Southern California. Most cities shut down about 8 or 9 o'clock. West Hollywood, we're just starting our second shift. And so our energy uses are different than other cities, where nighttime is seen as a place that's not peak. That's not necessarily the case for the city of West Hollywood with our nighttime entertainment districts on the Sunset Strip and on the western end of Santa Monica Boulevard. So I think our energy uses are somewhat different, and I just want to make sure that whatever we're contemplating doing, that we're cognizant of the fact that we have a different, two different sets of economies that run in order to keep our city prosperous. My colleagues already identified, I think, an issue that it sounds like everyone's thinking about it, and that is that 15% of our residents live in poverty. So I think we need to make sure that whatever we do, we're just aware and cognizant of how it impacts that percentage of our population. I tend to lean towards going to smaller is beautiful. I'm a big fan of Jerry Brown's book, The Brown Paper Bag, from way back in the 1970s, and I do think that large government tends to lead toward bureaucracies that are unmanageable and difficult. And so I do tend to lean towards smaller cities, but I can't get my head around having West Hollywood be part of something that just says South Bay without any recognition of West Side. So I got it. It's a working title. Good. Good. That's good. It would have to somehow include something else to do that. And the last thing I'll say is, at least to me, all this discussion, ultimately, the biggest issue is how we end up buying and building future energy supply. And the sort of uses that are out there, whether it's solar or wind or geothermal and other things that are good for the planet. That's actually, I think, where the primary focus should be. And I know enough about my city's history and culture that this has been a place for the last 100 years, even before we were a city, that's always been somewhat left of center, bohemian, leaning left and liberal, and almost on the border of socialism at times. So I want to make sure that as we're looking at all this, that we recognize that there's probably a pretty good chance, whether it's members of this body up here or whoever replaces us someday, that those individuals will probably want to demonstrate leadership in the area. So I want to make sure there's the opportunity for the city of West Hollywood not just to be a participant, but a place for us to exhibit leadership on environmental issues, as we always have done since incorporation. So that's really important to me as well. So I'm glad we're having the discussion. I'm not prepared to vote one way or the other tonight. I still have more questions, and I'm going to rely on our very good staff, because I think they're all very good. And I know you didn't make a recommendation tonight, but you've heard the discussion, and it seems to me that the county's proposal is more viable because of the nature that it is county government and has a great deal more resources, whereas South Bay Cities seems at this point like something that's in creation. And so if we ended up going with South Bay, West Side, whatever it becomes, then we're going to probably have to invest a little more heavily and not be as reliant on county resources for the initial foundation structure. So those are sort of the questions that I have in my head. So those are just my initial thoughts tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, it sounds like, if I hear the sense of the council, that we're all very much interested in going with this CCE. There seems to be different views as to why we want to do it, but some excitement about the potential cost savings, a lot of excitement about the environmental aspects of the energy choice model, and then a little bit of uncertainty as to which route we want to go, whether we want to go with the county or whether we want to go with the South Bay. Is that a fair summary of where the council is right now? So in terms of the direction you need tonight, it seems like we need to give you direction to continue this discussion, perhaps to develop the enabling ordinance. Is that something that we could give you direction to do tonight?
Yes, we already have documents from the county regarding the enabling ordinance and the JPA, which would be the next steps if council wants to go the route of LA County.
Okay. And if we wanted to go with the South Bay, then we would have to probably wait until they legally form, and presumably they could provide us with similar enabling ordinance as well.
We would actually need to take the lead if we wanted to proceed with South Bay at this time.
Okay, thank you.
The only question I have that's sort of outstanding is there seems to be a financial question that's being suggested. And so maybe, I mean, I know that you recently got the full proposal from South Bay, but have you had time, do you feel like you've thoroughly vetted it, and do you feel confident making a recommendation, hearing where the conversation has gone tonight? And what is your understanding of the financial model for each? Like, how would it impact the city?
So I think we would need to vet it further. At this point, what I can say is kind of a brief overview with the county. As was said, there is no cost implications with the county's program. With the South Bay program, there is not a direct cost that we would necessarily be writing a check to the South Bay, but there is no lead city right now. And so whatever lead city moves forward with the South Bay would then be working with the financial institution that provides them the $2.5 million loan as the startup, and would be guaranteeing that loan. If there's more cities than just one involved, then there may be a split of that guarantee, but that is the financial aspect right now. The other item with the county, or I'm sorry, with the South Bay, is that this is a JPA, and there is not necessarily any staff for the county or for the South Bay at this point. And so if several members joined a JPA for the South Bay, They would be in charge of hiring an executive director. They would be in charge of hiring staff and overseeing that staff. So there would be some additional startup work for city staff involved in that JPA with other cities that are a part of the 14 members in the South Bay. So that's kind of a very high-level, direct financial assessment for the city.
And is your assessment of the county numbers, I know there was a question raised about the numbers not being quite right. Did you come across that in your review of the county's financial proposal?
I have not reviewed the county's financial proposal. I think those questions would probably be more directed towards
We were just made aware of that error late last week, but we are also in close communication with the other West Side cities, our colleagues in those cities, and understand that several of us are interested in evaluating the two programs more closely and may bring in outside reviewers to assist with that process. We would expect that analysis could be complete probably in October.
Great.
One option might be that we wait to more thoroughly vet the two and bring those results back to the council for consideration at that time.
Yeah, I think we'd like to get in, early, so the sooner you can bring that back to us, the better. Councilmember Meister.
John wanted to say, did you want to say something? No.
You're next on my list.
Well, one of the advantages of going with the county sooner rather than later is the fact that right now there's only 3 members, the county and 2 cities, so we would obviously have a lot more input on the operations. And is that right?
That's correct, yes. We would have a lot more early influence on the program specifics.
Okay. Gary, I think you want to address this issue of the financial discrepancy.
Right. So there was a table that just got cut and pasted incorrectly, but the underlying spreadsheets that really came out of our business plan that have been out there for 2 years, as well as the update in April, are all consistent. What wasn't consistent was this somehow clerical error, as was pointed out. I'm embarrassed by it. I should have caught it. This was one of those documents that went through 7 levels of review, and the 7th time I read it, I didn't see the change in the table that was put into the document. But that was, we had never anticipated, if we had anticipated $500 million in revenue, we could just have free energy for everybody. That was never a goal. So that just didn't belong there.
Thank you.
I guess I do want to say, Mayor, that I agree that we want to do this sooner than later. I think we want to have a strong, or at least a commitment to it that says we're doing this. I don't think we want to sort of slip in and then try and convince our residents that we, did the right thing. But I also have to say that sort of, if there are 3 options and there's only seemingly 3, I'm interested in what the county's doing, and then I'm interested in staying with SCE because I know that they will be doing what they're doing and have been doing it. And then the South Bay, it also has potential, but I think there's sort of very few things we want to mess with. One of them is Fountain Avenue, and the second is sort of the delivery of energy to our residents, and the third is trash pickup. And, we've done Fountain Avenue and trash pickup, and this is the third, and I just want to sort of come forward and say that it's clear that what the South Bay has done is, get this engine moving and push this large bureaucracy to do some stuff. But what, for those of us who worked in AIDS, you saw that you pushed him and pushed him and pushed him, and suddenly the NIH and the CDC were huge and they took over, and so I think that's what's happened with the county, is that they've put their money where their mouth is. Sheila stepped up and put her shoe on the table like Khrushchev or something and said, we're going to do this. And so it's happening, and I just think, we should say this is what we're doing. And maybe it's not tonight. I get that we're not ready, but I'm ready to say that, like, I would rather 2 weeks from now we were sitting at that table, if 2.5 months from now we're going to be sitting there, if there's not something in particular that we're looking for. So I'm not saying this to pressure my colleagues, I'm just saying that, like, you know, I've been advocating for 5 years about all the stuff about renewables and a net zero city and reducing, and I'm convinced that if anybody's going to take their time and do it slowly, it's the county, because it's the county. And then, so that I just want to sort of say, like, maybe instead of asking them to look some more, we should be more direct about what we're asking them to do. And then, and maybe you've been very direct, but I'd like to say that you should bring back the paperwork we need at the next meeting, and if we don't want to move forward, we won't, but at least we will be giving them actual direction instead of deciding next time and waiting another month, and then we don't have a meeting that time, and whatever it is. So that's my extra 90
Councilmember
seconds.
Meister?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think we should really, we're serious about moving forward. We have an opportunity to be one of, maybe 4 or 5 at the table at the next meeting, which means that we will have, more opportunity to have our say as to what direction we see this going in. And I agree. I think that the county is just much further along. And if we're serious about wanting to do this, then I think that they are our best bet. I also feel like the county, we expect the county to be our partner with Metro and with the Metro site, and I think that it doesn't hurt us to be a partner here as well. So I'm prepared to move forward if that's what Councilmember Horvath's motion is.
Yes, I just was going to say that in addition to moving forward with the county, that we would want, when they prepare the enabling ordinance, that they provide the financial analysis, and if there are any questions that come up, that at that time we can deal with that.
Okay, so it sounds like council is now ready to move forward with the county, and the motion is to give direction to staff to bring back the enabling ordinance and to do the additional analysis of the financials. And that's your motion, and there is a second. Any further discussion on this? All in favor? The motion passes. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your presentations tonight. And I believe that completes our agenda. We have additional public comment? Okay. Ty Geltmaker, our last public speaker.
Friends, I'm back. I didn't go away. And thanks, John, for mentioning me by first name only in the last council meeting. I'm up there with Cher and Sting and others. Ty, if you look at the transcript. I'm only here tonight because this is not just a plug, but it is a plug for a book, which I emailed all of you about. Book Soup last night had a wonderful gathering, filled to the gills. City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles, 1771 to 1965, by the most amazing, wonderful UCLA lecturer, Kelly Lytle Hernandez. Boy, if I were one of her students, I'd be in heaven. This is a history, and those dates noted, of incarceration, exile, murder, internment, of indigenous, Asian, Black, and even white homos here in LA County City, under LAPD and LA County. I know we're part of LA County. I'm not an aggrieved member of West Hollywood, though I am often. But I'm an historian, and I cannot recommend this book enough to all of you and our citizens. It is mind-bogglingly opening, even to someone like me who thought I knew it all. There's a group, and I'm not plugging them because I have no connection with them in particular, and I honestly don't know what West Hollywood's official position may or may not be about jail expansion with the county. All of you are better at that than I am. But Critical Resistance is a group which was also present at this reading, and this professor has no official connection to them. She is a legitimate, this is University of North Carolina Press, UCLA tenured professor of history. So I cannot recommend enough. City of Inmates, Conquest Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles, 1771-1965. Kelly Lytle Hernandez. Thanks.
Thank you. And
I forgot to mention earlier that the Cannabis Education Forum is happening on Saturday, August 26th, right here in Council Chambers, to continue the conversation about what is happening with cannabis policy in West Hollywood. If you're interested in being part of that conversation and or learning more about where we're at in that process, that would be a good time to come and be part of the conversation. Thank you.
thank you. We're adjourned.